Chapter 3. When Olaf awoke, he saw by the light in the hall that it was long past noon. He raised himself on his elbow and found that Ingunn and Arnvid were sitting on the dais. The look on the girl's face was so strange, at once scared and thoughtful. She heard him get up and came rapidly to his bed. She wore the same bright red kirtle as the day before, and with the new vision with which he looked on her, Olaf turned hot with joy, for she was fair to look on. "Now I think we shall soon know what Brother Vigard meant, and the smith, with what they said about the axes," she said, greatly moved. "Arnvid says that Matthias Haraldsson was at the thing, and fared northward to the manor he has at Birid." "Ah," said Olaf. He was bending down to tie his shoestring. Then he straightened himself and gave Arnvid his hand in greeting. "Now we shall see what Steinfinn will do when he hears this." "He has heard it," replied Arnvid. "It is for that he has ridden north to Kolbein," says Ingeborg. "You must go out and fetch me some food, Ingunn," said Olaf. As soon as the girl was out of the hall, he asked the other, "Do you know what thoughts Steinfinn has now?" "I know what thoughts Ingeborg has," replied Arnvid. "Ah, yes, they are easily guessed." Olaf had always liked Arnvid Finnsson best of all the men he knew, though he had never thought about it. But he felt at ease in Arnvid's company. For all that, it would never have occurred to him to call the other his friend. Arnvid had been grown up and married almost as long as Olaf remembered him, and now he had been 2 years a widower. But today it was as though the difference in their ages had vanished. Olaf felt it so. He felt that he was grown up, and the other was a young man like himself. Arnvid was not settled and fixed in his ways, like other married men. His marriage had been like a yoke that was laid upon him in his youth, and since then he had striven instinctively to outgrow the marks of it. All this Olaf was suddenly aware of, without knowing whence he had it. And in the same way, Arnvid seemed to feel that the 2 young ones had shot up much nearer to him in age. He spoke to them as to equals. While Olaf was eating, Arnvid sat shaving fine slices, no thicker than a leaf, from a wind-dried shoulder of reindeer, which Ingunn was so fond of chewing. "The worst of it is that Steinfinn has let this insult grow so old," said Arnvid. "It is too late to bring a suit. He must take a dear revenge now, if he would right himself in folks' eyes. I cannot see how Steinfinn could have done anything before now. The man took pilgrims' fancies, fled the country with his tail between his legs. But now that we have gotten 2 unbreeched children for kings, a man may well use his own right arm and need not let the peasant's thing be judge of his honour. So I have heard Steinfinn and Kolbein say." "Yes, I think there is many a man now who makes ready to do his pleasure without much questioning of the law of the land, or the law of God," said Arnvid. "As many a one is growing restive now, up and down the land." "And what of you?" asked Olaf. "Will you not be with them, if Steinfinn and Kolbein have thoughts of seeking out Matthias and chastening him?" Arnvid made no answer. He sat there tall and high-shouldered, resting his forehead in his slender, shapely hand, so that his small and ugly face was completely shaded. Arnvid Finnsson was very tall and slight, of handsome build. Above all, his hands and feet were shapely. But his shoulders were too broad and high, and his head was quite small, but he was short-necked. This did much to take the eye away from the rest of his handsome form. His face, too, was strangely ill-featured, as though compressed, with a low forehead and short, broad chin, and black curly hair like the forelock of a bull. In spite of this, Olav now saw for the first time that Arnvid and Ingunn bore a likeness to each other. Arnvid, too, had a small nose, as though unfinished, but in the man it seemed pressed in under the brow. Arnvid, too, had large, dark blue eyes, but in him they were deep-set. Arnvid did not belong to the Steinfinn stock, but Tor of Hove had married his father's sister, and the likeness between his heavy, dark ugliness and Ingunn's restless charm was not to be mistaken. "So, I see, you have little mind to go with your kinsman in that which is now brewing," said Olav rather mockingly. "Be sure I shall not hang back," answered Arnvid. "What will he say to it, Bishop Thorfinn, your ghostly father, if you make common cause with us in what Steinfinn has on foot?" asked Olav with his little mocking smile. "He is in Bjorgvin now, so he cannot hear anything of it till the thing be done," said Arnvid shortly. "I can do nothing else. I must go with my cousin." And you are not one of his priests either," said Olav as before. "No, and more's the pity," replied Arnvid. "Would I were. This matter between Steinfinn and Matthias, the worst of it is, I think, that it is grown so old. Steinfinn must do something now to win back his honour. But then you may be sure that all the old talk will be chewed over again, and it will stink terribly. I hold myself not more fearful than other men. None the less do I wish I could have held aloof from these doings." Olav held his peace. Now they were touching again on a matter which was no clearer to Olav than it was to the Steinfinnsons. Arnvid had been put to book learning in his childhood, but then both his elder brothers had died, and his parents took him home again and married him to the rich bride who had been promised to his brother. But it seemed Arnvid did not count it as a good fortune to be called to the headship of his family and to possess the manor at Elfadal instead of being made a priest. The wife he got was fair and rich, and only 5 or 6 years older than he. Yet the young couple seemed ill-suited to each other. In some measure this may have come from their having little say in the house, so long as Arnvid's parents were alive. Then Finn, Arnvid's father, died. But just after that, his young wife, Tordis Erlingsdatter, died in childbirth. From that time, Arnvid's mother took control, and they said she was somewhat masterful. Arnvid let her have charge both of the estate and of his 3 little sons, and submitted to her in all things. In former times many men of the Steinfinn kin had been priests, and even if none of them had made a special mark in the service of the church, they had yet been good priests. But when it became the rule that priests in Norway must live unmarried, as in other Christian lands, the Steinfinnsons sought no more after book learning. It was by prudent marriages that the kin had always extended its power, and that a man might make his way in the world without support in his marriage, they could not believe. Summer heat had come in earnest the day Olaf and Ingunn had stolen away to Hamar. From the crag above the outlying barn, the fjord could be seen far below, beyond the waves of forest and patches of meadow in the hollows. On clear mornings, Lake Majose lay reflecting the headlands, scored with light stripes which betokened fine weather. As the day went on, all nature was bathed in heat haze, the land on the other side in blue mist, through which the green paddocks around the farms shimmered brightly. Far to the south, on Skry Fell, there was still a glitter of snow high up, gleaming like water and cloud, but the patches of snow grew smaller day by day. Fair-weather clouds were piled up everywhere on the horizon and sailed over forest and lake, casting shadows below. Sometimes they thinned out and spread over the sky, making it a dull white, and the lake turned grey and no longer reflected the land. But the rain came to nothing. It was blown away, and all the trees glittered with leaves flickering in the sunshine, as though the very land panted for heat. The turf roofs began to look scorched, and the cornfields yellowed in patches where the soil was thin. But the weeds flourished and grew high above the light shoots of young corn. The meadows burst into purple with sorrel and monkshood and St. Olaf's flower. There was little to do on the farm now, and nothing was done. The few who were left at home spent their days in waiting. Olaf and Ingunn idled among the houses. Separately, and as though by chance, they wandered down to the beck, which ran north of the farm. It flowed between high banks worn in the turf. The water rushed over great bedded rocks which stretched from bank to bank and fell into a pool below with a strangely soothing murmur. The two found a place under a clump of quivering aspens above the stream. The ground was dry here, with fine, thin grass and no flowers. "Come and lay your head in my lap," said the girl, "and I will clean it for you." Olaf shifted a little and laid his head upon her knees. Ingunn turned his fair, silky hair over and over till the boy dozed, breathing evenly and audibly. She took the little kerchief which covered the throat of her dress and wiped the sweat from Olaf's face, then sat with the kerchief in her hand, fanning off the flies and midges. From the higher ground she heard her mother's sharp, impetuous voice. The Lady Ingeborg and Arnvid Finnsson were walking on the path at the edge of the corn. Every day Ingeborg Jonsdatter went up and sat on the crag above the manor, gazing out as she talked and talked, of her old deadly hatred of Matthias Haraldsson and of her and Steinfinn's long-hatched plans of revenge. It was always Arnvid who had to go with her and listen and give ever the same answers to the lady's speech. Olaf slept with his head in Ingunn's lap. She sat with her neck against the stem of an aspen, staring before her, thoughtlessly happy, as Arnvid came down, wading through the long grass of the meadow. "I saw you two sitting here." "It is cool and pleasant here," said Ingunn. "It seems high time to begin haymaking," said Arnvid. He looked up the slope as a gust of wind swayed the grass. Olaf awoke and turned over, laying the other cheek in Ingunn's lap. "We shall begin after the holy day. I spoke to Grim this morning." "You do Steinfinn no little service here, Olaf?" asked Arnvid to draw him. "Oh," Olaf paused. "But 'tis ever the same here. Everything is left undone. 'Tis of little use to take a hand." "For all that, now there must come a change. Steinfinn will surely be more minded to look to his affairs. But this is my last summer here." "Are you to leave Fretterstein now?" asked Arnvid. "I think I must go home and see to my property some time," said Olaf, with a wisdom beyond his years. "So when Steinfinn has made an end of this matter, there will be talk of my going home to Hestviken. Steinfinn will be glad enough to have Ingunn and me off his hands." "It is not so sure that Steinfinn will have peace to settle such matters at present," said Arnvid below his breath. Olaf shrugged his shoulders, putting on a bold air. "All the more need for him that I take over the charge of my own estate. He knows I am no shirker, but will back my foster-father. You two are young yet to take over the charge of a great manor. You were no older, Arnvid, when you were married." "No, but we had my parents to back us, and yet I was the youngest. But they were afraid our line should die out when my brothers were dead." "Ah, yes, and I am the last man of my race," said Olaf. "That is so," replied Arnvid. but Ingunn is very young." All this Olaf had thought out since the journey to Hamar. After that first sweet and frenzied day, when he was plunged from one bewilderment to another with his playmate, he calmed down as soon as they were back at Fretterstein. None there had so much as noticed their flight, and this had a strangely cooling effect on his mental tumult. Then there was this too, that change and great events were in the air at the very moment when he himself felt that he was grown up, and this seemed to make it more natural that he too should feel an inward change. He left off playing with the other boys of the place, and none was surprised at this, for the tension which now prevailed at Fretterstein had spread to all their neighbours on the hills. Thus it seemed now quite natural that he should think seriously of his marriage, and in these long sunny days of summer that he spent with Ingunn, he felt a kind of tangible satisfaction in that he now had a much better understanding of the future which was in store for him than he ever could have had in his more childish years. Instead of uneasiness and timid shame, there was come a joyful and inquiring expectation. Something must happen now. Steinfinn would no doubt seize the opportunity, strike a blow. Of the consequences which might follow as Steinfinn struck his blow, Olaf had little thought. Instinctively he had absorbed the Steinfinnsons' ideas of their own power and glory. There was none to touch them. But neither had he any other thought than that Steinfinn would at once consent, when, after the deed was done, he asked leave to go home and hold his wedding. That would be next autumn or winter, and his new-born desire to possess Ingunn became one with his new-born ambition to be his own master. When he took her in his arms, it was as though he held a pledge of his maturity. When they came to Hestviken, they would sleep together and rule together, indoors and out, and there would be none to give orders but they two. Then they would come into their full rights. It was not often, however, that Olaf caressed his betrothed now. If he no longer was so shy and afraid, nor had gloomy thoughts, as when he felt the first breath of desire, he now had a clear view of what was manly and seemly. Only, when they parted for the night, he would often seek an occasion to bid her good night alone, in the manner he thought proper to two lovers who were soon to be married. That Ingunn's eyes betrayed far too much whenever they chanced to look at one another seemed to Olaf a part of the good fortune fate had prepared for him. He noted how she watched for a chance of looking at him, and her glance was strange, heavy, and full of delightful darkness. When she met his eyes, a little sparkle was kindled in hers. She looked away, afraid she might smile. She stole a chance of stroking him with her hand when they met, was fond of playing with his hair whenever they were left alone for a moment. She was very eager to do things for him, offered to mend his clothes, brought in his food if he came to a meal a little later than the rest of the men, and when he said good night to her, she clung to him as though hungry and thirsty for his caresses. Olaf took this to mean that she too longed for their wedding, and he thought that natural. Time must be long for her too in this house. She must look forward eagerly to being mistress of her own home. It never occurred to him that there might be young people who did not care for each other, although they were betrothed. But the journey to Hamar remained a dream to Olaf. He thought of it most often when he lay down at night, and he lived it again till he felt the strange sweet tremor in body and mind. He recalled how they had knelt at dawn behind the widow's bier, leaning breast to breast, and he had dared to kiss her on the temple, under the hair which smelt so warm and good. And then this unaccountable melancholy and dread settled on him. He tried to think of the future, and for them the path of the future was a straight one, to the church door and the high seat and the bridal bed. But his heart seemed to grow weak and faint when, in those night hours, he tried to rejoice in all that awaited them, as though, after all, the future could have nothing more in store for them so sweet as that morning kiss. "What is it?" asked Arnvid crossly. "Can you not lie still?" "I am going out a while." Olaf got up, dressed again, and threw a cloak about him. There was already less light in the sky at night. The thick foliage of the trees looked darker against the misty blue of the hills beyond. The clouds to the northward were streaked with yellow. A bat flitted past him, black and swift as lightning. Olaf went to the bower where Ingunn slept. The door was left ajar for coolness' sake, and still it was close inside, with a smell of sun-baked timber, of bedding, and of human sweat. The maid who lay next the wall snored loudly in her sleep. Olaf knelt down and bent his face over her who lay outside. With cheek and lips he gently touched Ingunn's breast. For an instant he kept quite still, so as to feel the soft, warm bosom which lightly rose and fell as she breathed in sleep, and he heard her heartbeats under it. Then he drew his face up to hers, and she awoke. "Dress yourself," he whispered in her ear. "Come out a while." He waited outside on the balcony. Soon Ingunn appeared in the low doorway and stood a while as though surprised at the stillness. She took a few deep breaths. The night was cool and good. They sat down side by side at the top of the stairway. And now they both felt it so strange that they should be the only ones awake in the whole manor. Neither was used to being out at night. So they sat there without moving, scarce venturing to whisper a word now and then. Olaf had thought he would wrap his cloak around her and put an arm about her waist, but all he did was to place one of her hands on his knee and stroke her fingers, till Ingunn withdrew her hand, threw her arm about his shoulder, and pressed her face hard against his neck. "Are not the nights darker already?" she asked in a hushed voice. "The air is dense tonight," he said. "Ah, haply there will be rain tomorrow," she wondered. There was a blue-grey mist over the strip of fjord they could see from where they sat, and the hills were blotted out on the far side. Olaf looked vacantly before him, pondering. "That is not so sure. There's an easterly set in the wind. Can you not hear how loud the stream sounds above tonight?" "We had best go to bed," he whispered a little later. They kissed each other, a quick and timid little kiss. Then he stole down again, and she went in. Inside the hall it was pitch dark. Olaf undressed and lay down again. "Have you been out talking to Ingunn?" asked Arnvid, wide awake at his side. "Yes." Soon after Arnvid asked again, "Have you found out, Olaf, what are the settlements about your estate and Ingunn's?" "No, I have not. You know I was so young when I was betrothed to her. But surely Steinfinn and my father must have made an agreement about that, what we are to bring to each other." "Why do you ask me this?" said Olaf with sudden surprise. Arnvid did not answer. Olaf said, "Steinfinn will take good care that we get what we are to have according to the settlement." "He is my cousin," Arnvid spoke with some hesitation. "But you are soon to be our kinsman by marriage. I may well speak of it to you. They say Steinfinn's fortunes are not so good as they were. I have lain awake thinking of what you spoke of, and I think you are right. You would be wise to hasten the marriage, so that Ingunn may get what comes to her as soon as may be. Yes, we have nothing to wait for either, said Olav. The next day was a holy day, and the day after they began to cut the grass at Fretestein. Arnvid and his man helped in the haymaking. Early in the day the sky turned pale and grey, and by afternoon big dark clouds began to drift up from the south and spread over the hazy sky. Olaf looked up as they stood whetting their scythes. The first drop of rain fell on his face. "Maybe it will be but a shower or two tonight," said one of the old housecarls. "Tomorrow is Midsummer Day," answered Olaf. "If the weather change on that day, it will rain as many days after as the sun shone before, I have always heard. I think we shall have no better hay crop this year, Torleif, than we had last year." Arnvid was standing a little farther down the field. Now he laid down his scythe, came up quickly toward the others, and pointed. Far down the hillside rode a long line of armed men across a little glade in the forest. "It is they," said Arnvid. "It seems they are set upon another kind of mowing. And now, by my troth, I wonder how it will go with the haymaking at Fretestein this year." Late in the evening the rain came down with a thick white mist that drifted in patches over the fields and wooded slopes. Olaf and Ingunn stood under the balcony of the loft where she slept. The lad stared angrily at the pouring rain. Arnvid came running across the mud of the courtyard, darted into the couple, and shook himself. "How is it you are not in the men's councils?" asked Olaf with a sneer. Olaf would have followed them when the men went into Ingeborg's little house. They chose it for their meeting out of earshot of the servants. But Steinfinn had bidden his foster son stay in the hall with the housecarls. Olaf was angry. Now that in his own thoughts he reckoned himself Steinfinn's son-in-law, he forgot that the other did not yet know their alliance was about to be welded so fast. Arnvid stood leaning against the wall, glaring before him mournfully. "I shall not shirk my duty, but shall follow my kinsman as far as Steinfinn may call upon me. But I will have no part in their counsels." Olaf looked at his friend. The boy's pale, finely arched lips curled lightly in a scornful smile.